The society of Victorian England is greatly associated with restraint and repression, with its members following an overwhelming set of rules and conforming to expectations. The period spanned the entirety of Queen Victoria's reign from 1837 to 1901. The term Victorian was first coined in 1851 during the Great Exhibition in London, where Victorian inventions and morals were showcased to the world. The Victorians saw the rise of the Industrial Revolution, a time of relative peace and political stability for Great Britain, and the growth of the British Empire to the largest ever in existence. Within the society itself, there remained strict class separations: the upper class, the middle class, and the lower class. The upper class consisted of the royal family and the aristocracy. The aristocracy was made up of a select group of families who rarely had to work to make a living, due to their families gathering enough money over the centuries to fund the luxurious lives of each generation. This was the only class with any influence in politics and the running of the country. The middle class were a larger, more diverse group of people, containing anyone from rich bankers to small store clerks. This class held family and togetherness in high esteem, as they had the opportunity to keep their families together, unlike the upper classes whose children were raised by nurses and the lower classes whose children were sent to work at a fairly young age. The lower class was the poorest of the three. They lived in the worst conditions, cramming families into single-room apartments or sleeping on the streets. They were the unskilled workers and the uneducated, and they frequently sent their children to work to afford the ever-growing price of food. These strict class distinctions dictated everything in Victorian life, from the way you dressed to how you acted and who you socialized with. For the Victorians, conforming to their morals and values was of the utmost importance. In particular, they held sexual restraint, intolerance of criminal activity, and the maintenance of a respectable reputation in the highest regards. Not conforming to these views would result in rejection from respectable society. These values were influenced by the attitudes of the royal family of the time. Before Queen Victoria's reign, the Hanoverian family had ruled Britain with a loose regard for morality and values as a reaction to the Puritan rule before them. Queen Victoria and her husband Albert had observed the negative effect their predecessors' behaviour had had on the public's opinion of the royal family, and as a result they both had a high moral code. This example set the standard for Victorian morals and values, impacting the social climate of the time. Sexual restraint was very important for the Victorians of the upper and middle classes, and especially affected the women of the time. The duty of a woman in the Victorian era was to get married and have children. Though to be deemed worthy of marriage, women were expected to portray the characteristics of a lady: submissiveness, purity, and piety. With a heavy fixation on purity, it was necessary for women to remain pure until marriage if they hoped to find husbands. Though even after a successful search for a husband, sex still remained a taboo topic, viewed as a shameful necessity to married life. The church looked down on intimacy for the purpose of pleasure, and that act was considered a sin against God. Apart from conceiving, married couples would sleep in separate beds to prevent the temptation for intimacy. Alongside the pressure for women to abstain from sex till marriage, men too were pushed to control their natural instincts. Though unlike women, they did not have to remain pure before marriage, and so the prostitution business flourished to cater to the need. In the Victorian era, prostitution was not illegal, though many prostitutes were still arrested and sent to prison or reformatory centres. These women would usually be arrested for public drunkenness or gathering in large groups instead. These acts were common among prostitutes and were illegal in the Victorian era. This intolerance to crime comes from the high moral beliefs of the Victorians. Criminals were viewed as part of the lowest class, and it was believed that their actions could be blamed on the way their parents had raised them. Because of this, many Victorians showed no tolerance for crime, so as to teach their children to be law-abiding citizens. This in turn would allow the family to keep a respectable reputation. Keeping up a respectable reputation in the Victorian era was one of the most important aspects of Victorian life. This core value encompasses the first two, as it was necessary to practice sexual restraint and to be intolerant to crime to maintain a respectable reputation. reputation could also be affected by the company one kept. Within Victorian social circles, there was a hierarchy of titles that would be observed when conversing with others. For example, a baron would not have been permitted to strike up conversation with an earl, a higher-ranking person, unless they were first introduced by another earl. These sorts of social rules can be encompassed in the general rules of etiquette. The Victorians had many different codes of etiquette, from passing others on the street to attending church and travelling. If people did not conform to these expectations of behaviour, they would most likely be rejected from society. Practically everything in Victorian life was dictated by the rules of etiquette, demonstrating the strictness of the time period. Alongside the morals and the values that dictated the lives of the Victorians, there was an overwhelming religious presence. The dominant religion of the time was Christianity, with high church officials holding powerful positions in the Houses of Parliament. The Victorians were a God-fearing people, attending church regularly and following the teachings of the Bible. However, the Victorian era also experienced the emergence of new sciences, such as Darwin's theories on evolution. The church suffered a severe blow from these new sciences as people began to doubt their religious beliefs. For the rest of the era, there was conflict between science and religion, though despite this, most Victorians could not part from God completely, and the church survived on even after the end of the period. The Victorians saw a society changed by the development of new technologies, encouraging people to leave their farming lives to pursue greater things in the expanding cities. They felt the shockwave of the scientific movement and the benefits of a growing empire. They lived in a time of high moral code and strict beliefs of modesty and respectability, despite living with the highest rate of prostitution ever known to British history. These people left a lasting impression on the world, advocating all that is polite and proper under the influence of their Queen Victoria.